Let's see. All right. So Nicholas, where are you based out of?
I'm based in London, West London.
Oh, London. Okay. So we're covering 3 time zones then.
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Mark being in East Coast, myself on mainland Europe, and you're being in UK.
Yes. It is.
So I wonder where I can see who joined. Keep that coffee coming, Mark.
Yeah, right. This is a comically large coffee mug that is unfortunately almost empty. So
yeah. Are you, because I can't see your background, are you in the office or?
No, I mean, it's my office. The blocking of the background is purposeful because it's a total disaster back there.
Right.
No, I work from home, like,
Got it, yeah.
you know, since you know, COVID started. But I don't know. For me, it's funny. There's this whole movement of trying to get people back to work, and how I'm not even exaggerating. I think I'm at least 3 or 4 times more productive when I work from home.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, same here as well. I've been working from home ever since 2020, and yeah, I mean, sure, I do see where some people prefer to go to the office, or some companies would prefer to do that, but I work a lot better from home.
Yeah,
much better.
Yeah. I feel you. Yeah, there are some things that are better in person, like strategy or like some ideation, but most of the work that you do throughout the week. Yeah. All right, we are almost 4 minutes in, so I think we'll get started soon.
Awesome.
Let me just check one thing quickly. Good, we're at 4 past, so I would say let's get started with, well, first of all, thank you, Mark, Nicholas, for joining. I'll be moderating, trying to guide the conversation today a bit. So I think let's start with, who's on the call. Should we do a brief introduction, tell a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into things after that. Whoever wants to go first.
Sure. I'll go first.
All right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Lerner. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing at DealHub. DealHub is a CPQ and revenue lifecycle management for a new agile era of sales. My background is in kind of the B2B SaaS world for the last 11, 12 years, doing growth marketing operations, and just, wearing more hats than I care to share. Having experienced very early stage startups, I've kind of lived the life of having to learn and do things beyond the scope of what's traditionally marketing. And so my role today is in growth marketing that kind of encompasses a lot of, more technical stuff as well. And really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Nick. I am a RevOps and go-to-market strategy advisor, primarily for B2B SaaS businesses. I've been in operations for almost 15 years, and kind of just building out the concept of revenue ops, and trying to build the urgency as well for, responsible, scalable operations in earlier stage businesses. And my recent role was as vice president of revenue operations at CloudCall, and now just advising some businesses within the same space, so B2B SaaS in general.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you both so much. Great to have you here. I think between the two of you already, we have tons of different views that you've seen throughout your careers on what RevOps is, or what it can be, I guess, in many cases as well. I mean, let's start off by going through some questions and just kind of setting a bit of perspective for those that are listening in as well. And one of the first things I wanted to check and get your view on is like, RevOps, depending on the organization, RevOps can be in a few different places, right? So what, in your view, what is the best place to have revenue operations, and what should the typical structure of that team look like?
Well,
I'll let you take it, Nick.
That, as you put, Vincent, it takes different shape depending on the size of the organization primarily. That's the first thing I think we need to consider. The larger you go, the more fragmented it becomes, and you then start seeing the actual split between sales, marketing, customer success operations, deal desk, financial operations, insights, so on and so forth. But if you're talking about a smaller organization, you would see probably a structure that's a bit more lean. So you have, as Mark put before, people wearing lots of different hats and trying to do the same thing across different teams and different things across one team. So you get RevOps managers or people within each one of the functions, so sales ops. But you're basically looking at a very, very lean and small team, especially because of budgets and the recent kind of changes in the macroeconomics recently. I think we can delve into that later, but I think it plays a significant role in, well, the role of RevOps in 2024 moving forward. But essentially, I think my main takeaway is, regardless of the size of the organization, you need to be working under someone who is willing to sponsor the role, sees the value in it, for sure, and isn't biased to the point where you're not just looking at one vertical or one branch of a business, right? You're not talking about a chief revenue officer who's actually just a chief sales officer or chief commercial officer. That person oversees the funnel, the entire funnel, revenue funnel, obviously, or someone in operations, be that the COO, the CFO, I think is already starting to get a bit too detached from the business as a whole. Mm-hmm. But usually not the CEO, because that takes a different turn depending on the organization. But I think essentially is the person who would bring more value to the day-to-day of that person and let the role develop the way it should. That's my take.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree on a lot of it. I think I'll take a step back and say, there's a difference between where I think it should report to on the structure and where sometimes it does. In my opinion, and based on kind of what I see, that the role of RevOps is part of a larger change in the way organizations are structured, from this kind of siloed approach where sales was here, marketing was there, customer success was there, to a more aligned approach where all those kind of customer-facing, revenue-generating departments kind of sit in the same org. And that I think that's kind of indicative of a larger change, and therefore I think a role like CRO is the correct report, top of that organization. Unfortunately, that doesn't always play out, right? As Nick said, sometimes someone with a CRO title is just a fancier way of saying head of sales. It's just another way for them to get, an increase in their salary or a bump in their title. And then unfortunately, sometimes someone with a RevOps role is just a CRM administrator. I don't want to say just, but that's what they end up hiring them for. And that's obviously, and we'll talk about it later, that's not the role. But I think that regardless of what it is, it needs to be in an organization that's kind of cross-functional, and not, on a very specific silo, or else you lose the value of the whole concept.
I think what would actually add potentially a lot of value to the audience as well is for us to at least try to define what RevOps is, right? I think there are lots of people out there who don't really understand or even sometimes know what RevOps is or what it can do or kind of what it encompasses. And most of the time, what I try to do is always start by defining, at least obviously it's going to be my opinion, but I've seen different scenarios and setups, so I think I can give a broader perspective on that. But I think we can do that, and then we can set the stage to then move on. How does that sound?
You're
my favorite.
Yeah, you're kind of catching the next question already. So yes, let's do that. And maybe after we've done that, we touch on this a little bit again and see, okay, so what does that then mean in terms of what we just discussed in terms of structure? But yes, take it away, I would say.
All right. Okay. So I think from a definitions, that's tough because, again, everybody, or depending on who you ask, you get a different answer, right? But I think regardless of the tactical implementation and the tactical definition of what RevOps is a growth support function, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build predictability and scalability into operations to allow people to do and generate revenue more efficiently. Now, the tactical definition for that is the combination of sales, marketing, and customer success, maybe legal and finance operations into one team. But that's tactical definition, right? What it actually is from a business standpoint is connecting the customer life cycle, right? And building a bit more predictability into the lead to cash process from the very beginning to the very end of the funnel, and making it as seamless as possible for the customer, but also for people internally, right? RevOps is not customer facing, but our customers are the sales reps, the CSMs, the marketing team, right? So in some way we are, but it's that idea of combining and making it as seamless as possible throughout the entire revenue funnel.
I think that's a pretty good definition. And this is, it's funny, we're however many years we are into what's now, RevOps being, I think at some point was the most sought after role on LinkedIn, I think last year. About 5 years ago, I joined a company that was deeply into the RevOps space. And it was actually in the title of the company. And I actually had to Google, what is RevOps? I'm sure that many people have done that Google search. And I found that it was not all that well defined. And it's still, I think, in its, in the evolution of its definition. But I think that breaking it into kind of its tactical and then its strategic role is a good approach. On the most basic level, it is the combination of these roles that we're supporting individual pillars of a go-to-market. So instead of having, unique sales ops, unique marketing ops, and customer success ops, combining that. And it's really about, like Nick said, supporting that entire customer journey. And I think it's important, especially today, to know that, we talk about, like, let's say lead to cash, that the cash is not a point in time and then it's over. It's not a straight line. It's a circle, right? Because it's not only about closing the initial deal. It's about supporting the ongoing lifetime value. Exactly. The not only recognizing the revenue of that first deal or that initial close, but also upsell, cross-sell, expansion, and renewal, and the support of that. And I think that piece of the funnel is something that is getting renewed, intensive, focus, due in part, I think, to the economic factors that Nick talked about. So, I think it's both tactical as kind of combining these operational roles that help the go-to-market customer-facing teams do their jobs better, but it's also a strategic level, kind of helping the company guide them towards that mentality. And I think that a lot of the challenges that people in RevOps roles have today are often in advocating for that strategic authority. There's a lot of times where they're brought in under this guise of head of RevOps, and again, they're just given a project list of our leads are broken here, and our sales reps need this custom field or whatever. And it's not more about the bigger picture. And I think that's a challenge.
Would you say in many organizations the definition of RevOps is just driven by what the company needs at that point in time? So it can cover quite a wide spectrum, right? But whichever part that specific company needs, that's what it becomes kind of, and then you have to almost fight your way out of that later if when you want to expand the scope.
Yeah.
I think it's like that with a lot of positions though, right? I mean, we have all these terms that get thrown around, right? Like, what is growth, right? It's like you ask different people. Some people say growth is a marketing role, growth is a product role. What is, so yes, I think the company itself defines what those things are, but it does have maybe a North Star that everybody kind of aligns to. And I think that North Star for RevOps is still in its, evolutionary phase.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's going to solve itself pretty quickly. I think that the size of the company also dictates how tactical versus how strategic you can be. Also, in my opinion, the whole concept of tactical versus strategic for RevOps is a bit overstated, because when you think about the strategy behind everything, there's almost always an element of tactical and operational that needs to go behind it, right? So the people who think, oh yeah, RevOps is just strategic, we need to be a strategic. Yeah, we are absolutely, trailing into that direction. But as the, function and the title suggests, it's operations as well, right? So you are going to naturally be tactical and operational. And so you are naturally, obviously, having to wear multiple hats across the board. And I don't honestly think it changes from one company, from a size of the business. You're always going to have to be doing multiple things all the time. But the idea of always having to shift priorities is something that will never change.
So yes. Let's look at some developments in like the market, so to say, in the industry. The first thing I wanted to ask you your view on is so there's been a RevOps trend report recently done by Scratchpad, and they said that only 22% of the RevOps and sales leaders strongly agreed that they had the right data to forecast accurately. What's your view on this thing, and where do you see the biggest gaps for this part of the business?
I would say it's even lower, to be honest. But I think in general there are two main reasons for this. In terms of the data, it's just probably bad system and bad data architecture. You haven't set up things for success. You haven't had a proper step back to look at your entire process and how it is versus how it should be, and designed a data architecture and infrastructure good enough to capture that. And the second point is, I don't think people know how to forecast most of the time. Like, people just don't understand the value, the reason, or even the why you should be forecasting, and kind of the benefits it brings to you, and the benefits it brings to the business as well, right? So learning the differences and what needs to happen from pipeline, best case, commit, or obviously these are just names, but it's a mentality, right? It's what you need to put into a stage that you then get out to then move to a different stage. Obviously these are just stages from a CRM, but that's not the point, right? The concept's still valid. So I think that's the mindset and the kind of the idea of teaching that, and that is one of the missing pieces. But Mark, feel free to chime in.
Yeah. So I think it's probably lower. I think maybe there's some people that are overly optimistic. There's a famous saying by there's a guy named Donald Rumsfeld, talking about known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Meaning that there are things you know that you don't know, and there are things that you don't know that you don't know. And so I think that there's a lot of unknown unknowns that people don't even know that they're don't have this data. I think on the other side of that, there is a problem of too much data. If you have so much data and you can't pull the signal from the noise, that's worse than having not a lot of data. And so I think it comes down to having the right data and knowing what the right data is, and not getting caught in the noise. And this is a problem that I don't think there is a clear solution to. I know I'm getting ahead of the game here, but I do see an opportunity for the emergence of artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually have a big impact here. That we're, so much of the focus of AI has been on large language models and being able to generate, sales outreach that's contextual, but there's a lot of value in a lot of value in applying machine learning models to forecasting, and you can do so with very minimal data and probably have a lot better of an outcome than some of the more complex notions that people try to build. And so I think that is a direction for RevOps that AI and machine learning is going to have a big role. And I don't think it's quite landed yet. There hasn't been a chat GPT moment for this for ops yet, but I think there will be.
Yeah, I think to that point, with regards to AI, Mark is spot on, because one of the primary things that I think anybody in RevOps, especially nowadays, has to go through is through bad data, through system integrations, through endless Excel, trying to figure out why people are putting forecasting in Excel rather than using in Salesforce. And even if they do it in Salesforce, or the CRM, being agnostic here, why is the data correct? Does it make sense? Does it align with the company's vision, idea of how it is? So the AI needs to come in to help streamline and figure out a lot of the tactical manual things that we do and lift that out of our plates so that we have time to actually do more meaningful things with it, right? Rather than spending hours building an Excel, just build that for me, and then I will, or even read it, and I will do the rest, right? I will drive the meeting. I will bring in the value. I will also bring in the perception of what I believe to be the, anything with regards to the forecasting itself, the cadence, so on and so forth, right? So I think it's a lot of the heavy lifting that we need to focus on for AI.
Yeah, and I think that even the models that people build for their forecasting have baked in bias. It's, even if they're not consciously doing it, they're like, okay, this is our ideal customer journey that we, but is that because that's the kind of customer that you want, or is that because that's the customer that is most likely to close? Whereas a machine learning model doesn't have that bias. It's just looking for the similarities and the likelihood to close and all those things. And I think that that is going to be a huge value to companies that who do sales, whether it's SaaS or whatever, being able to get that right and have it be democratized so that it's not only the most expensive and complicated, largest teams can manage it, but something that can be deployed across, really any kind of stack. When that happens, that's going to be a huge value to companies.
Still, like machine learning models and AI, they will only be as good as the data set that we feed into them, right? And I think both of you just mentioned, well, one of the big issues is the data. There's gaps, there's unknown unknowns, there's so would you say then that becomes one of the bigger problems to solve to truly enable this, or what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think the underlying is garbage in, garbage out. That's what I always say. The underlying thing to enable AI is still going to be the data, and that is still going to be dependent on people following processes and people kind of understanding the value that it is to have that. And sure, we have tools around that to do data enrichment and all that, sure, but some are wrong, some are off, some are not a bit faulty here and there. But essentially, yeah, the data is going to be and will always be a massive piece of that. Otherwise, to Mark's point, you will be analyzing ICPs with your gut feeling versus the AI telling you something that is completely different, but still also wrong because the data is wrong, right? So that is fundamental to be done before anything else.
Yeah, I like to say that AI and these technologies are like a microphone, right? You can have, the best microphone, the loudest microphone, but if you have a terrible singing voice, it's just going to amplify a very, very terrible singing voice. And so they are able to kind of 10x whatever the kind of baseline is. But if the source, if the baseline data is garbage, then you're just making it worse. You're just proliferating bad data. And so there's always, that is definitely a problem. And maybe there will be AI models to help clean data that will then talk to the AI that, identifies the trends and the indicators, that then talks to the AI agent that translates it. I think we're getting there. But I do want to put in a point here that I don't see a world in which RevOps or any other kind of job, title is completely becomes obsolete as a result of AI. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think that, AI is not going to take your job. Somebody who does your job well by leveraging AI is going to be the person that takes your job.
Agreed.
So, I might steal that analogy on the singing voice, by the way. That's great.
It's very appropriate for me. I'm just, yeah.
Yeah. If we're talking here about like data quality, and I wanted to ask you one thing about that as well. So what is like your source of truth when it comes to data, right? Like if we think 10, maybe 15 years ago, everyone would have answered CRM, like hands down, I think, but the world has been evolving quite a bit as well. So how do you view that, Nicholas? I see you already nodding, you're shaking your head. So what's your view?
Some years ago, I would have said CRM because I think the CRM is probably one of the central pieces and kind of where all the other systems connect into and dump all the information. But if there's anybody from business intelligence in the audience or anybody from the back end, at this point, I would have to say the data warehouse. So the data warehouse should be the place that CRM collects everything from the revenue side, great, but it still sends over to the data warehouse because that's where all the product information, usage, adoption, logins, everything related to your product and all the people within using and interacting with it lie. So theoretically, sure, you could send it over from the data warehouse to the CRM, but we all know that APIs for that and all the integrations just require so much work that it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It is probably just easier to send it from the CRM over somewhere else. So I would say that the single source of truth, considering that your data is obviously perfect, which it will never be, but considering that the data is all correct and your entire architecture is perfect, the data warehouse would still be the place that I would vote to be the single source of truth, because that is still where you can potentially store financial information, revenue information, customer records, and all that. When in a CRM, sure you can, but it's a bit more cumbersome.
Yeah. I think this idea of having this perfect single source of truth
doesn't exist really.
Yeah, it's a fairy tale. There's so many sources of data, and yes, I think it all goes through the engine of the data warehouse. However, if the question of what does a single source of truth mean is, when you're kind of arguing with your manager about what's our pipeline, did I hit quota, whatever, and there are numbers here and numbers there, they're going to look at the CRM and say, well, this is what we go off of. We go off of the CRM. And so, and I that's a very sticky concept, at least in my experience. And so I think in an ideal world, it's, taking the data from the data warehouse and having it correctly go into the CRM and enrich the records accordingly, and then having everyone else use that, because the data warehouse, the data lake, whatever, is not accessible for everybody. And it's not something someone can just kind of go into, at least in most places, and kind of get a view of everything. And so I think the CRM still stands as the central location that everyone kind of looks to. But it is not, it doesn't stand alone. It's powered by a data warehouse, a data lake, because of the, these, the product usage data, enrichment data, intent data from outside of, from external sources. All of that's got to get pumped in and be applied to your, to your prospect data as well.
And in the beginning, we spoke a bit about, well, it depends what size the organization is in, right? How do you see that play a role here? I mean, obviously, like a small organization has less tech set up, but what I'm more curious about is like when does the data warehouse come in? Like, do you see that at the very early days already, or is this something that gets implemented much further down the line?
Ideally, the sooner the better, always. If you do, I've worked at companies that were already pretty large, not having a data lake or a data warehouse, which is already a big problem if you're trying to do any sort of analysis on usage patterns or anything like that. But it's also very expensive. Like data warehouses, infrastructure and all that, it's pretty expensive to do. So you would usually do it further down the line because you have other priorities. So you could kind of get by with front-end systems, as Mark put. You can still do a lot with the CRMs and having everything on a more of accessible system. And then think about something that would connect both, and then still have, because the idea of single source of, you cannot have one system to do everything. You need to at least have the ones that are accessible by the people who use them, and then, but still have all of them connected together where they share this information, right?
Yeah.
And that happens better in larger businesses where you already have a much more thought out data architecture and kind of systems architecture. But in smaller businesses, you can get by with pretty basic things, but the sooner the better, always.
Yeah, I can give I'll tell a story in a little bit about how, this played out in a very early stage company that I was at. So the company I was at was very early stage, 10, 15 people. We needed that product usage data in our CRM, and we didn't have the resources internally for a data warehouse. We did not have the developers that would do it. And it fell on me, the marketer, somehow, to make this happen. And so I kind of looked at the problem and said, okay, sure, like this, I can't be the only person with this problem. There's got to be an easy solution. And there really wasn't. I looked at Segment. Our dev team would have had to put, stuff on the product. They just weren't going to do that. None of the CRMs had this built in. And, I kind of was going around in circles and trying to figure it out. And the solution I ended up doing was using a reverse ETL, SQL queries into our database, and then pulling that data into the CRM records, which was in HubSpot. And in that way, we were able to kind of build that. We didn't have a traditional data warehouse with data scientists or anything like that. But the reason I'm saying that is that there are ways in which you can kind of fake it till you make it, especially at the early stage. But it is important that you don't have these blind spots. And I think that these days, you don't have to say, well, we don't have the developer resources to make that happen. I didn't have ChatGPT then. I had to kind of learn SQL to make that happen. If I had ChatGPT, it would have taken me a day instead of a month. But making these things happen, connecting the pipes on behind the scenes, at least with Scotch tape, is something I think every company at every stage can do if they kind of just take the initiative.
Yeah, and I think that notion of connectedness is probably more important than having it all in one place, right? And if it's with duct tape or if it's like a formal setup, at least you got to understand how things relate to each other. You're touching here already on another interesting topic, which is like, okay, how do I choose how to put things together. Do I have resources to build something or not? And if so, like how, how do I decide what to buy, what to build, to connect like different data sets with each other, to automate, to generate insights, and so on. So can you, share a little bit of like how you approach those kind of things? Because there are so many tools out there, but when do you use them?
So many.
And when do you go in-house?
Yeah,
go for it.
So, for me, I think that, having a background that is less developer like, I love looking at the new tools coming around. Maybe too much. I love going on product hunt and seeing the newest things that are out there. I love testing them. But, I obviously had this gap in my knowledge that, made it impossible for me to do a lot of these things. I would say over the last year, with being able to use ChatGPT to kind of fill my knowledge gaps, how do I, what is the script I need in order to connect to this API? That has opened a whole new world for me, in which I actually prefer to build internally, show the value, and then make the case internally that we should buy, if we need to, a tool that actually does this, built in. So a lot of the stuff I do from a growth perspective are experimentation, how to optimize. And a lot of that is done by, kind of that duct tape kind of way, making different systems work together. And so I do that a lot with APIs and different systems. I personally use a program called N8N, which is a free Zapier alternative that you host yourself. And it kind of gives you the flexibility to connect data all over the place. But I also, will build scripts and host them to send APIs. And again, I have no formal background in all this, but through being able to kind of interface with AI to help fill the gaps there, I've been able to do that, and then show the value. Hey, I did this thing where I pulled data from here into a Google sheet, automated this process, and was able to have this result. Here, dev team, this is, I need you to formalize this into something that's a little bit more streamlined. And I think that's the approach, especially today with limited budgets, that needs to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I can second that for sure. I've never ever joined a company where I just started saying, look, I need a budget of 100K to buy this tool. Just never worked, because you don't show value. You need to show the value. You need to show the people. I mean, from a balance sheet perspective, right? When you're spending money, you need to know what you're spending money on and what it's going to return, right? Otherwise, it's kind of tough to justify anything. So I've done pretty much the same approach from you, Mark, is building out MVPs, right? And figuring out, what am I trying to achieve? This is kind of what I want to get from a tool, or the results I'm looking for. And so I'm going to do this for an X amount of time, but obviously it takes a lot of time to do it. So if we can get a tool, then this is the amount of time that I'm saving on my end to then just have this automated, right? At the end of the day, in my opinion, RevOps is about saving time across the board, right? We help people save time by optimizing processes and making things a bit more lean. And so saving that and shaving, 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, at the end of the day, you put it all together, it's a lot of time that you manage to save across the board from different teams. And the tools and this approach also helps that. Sure, we invest a lot of time to build it, but that is just to prove the value and the concept, right? After that, theoretically, you would then move on to getting a tool to help doing that. But this could also then roll over into another topic, which is planning out what it is that you need. Because there are different tools doing different things, and sometimes you can get one that does kind of what the other does. So you have a massive overlap, and then you start kind of bucketing one tool over the other, and then you have this massive tech stack where there's massive overlap. So this obviously takes into a different turn in terms of the discussion, but that is also super important. So figuring out the MVP approach and trying to be scrappy about it first, allows you time to think about the rest and take a look at a bigger picture, right? Rather than just going out and buy something.
Yes, for sure. And I think it also shows that it's possible, right?
Exactly.
So I can come up with the greatest project plan and say, this is what I want to do, this is the outcome. But often there's some skepticism, especially from a developer who is like, I need to know that I'm investing time here and there's going to be a result. And if you can kind of build, like you said, an MVP and actually show that it's possible, then you're much more likely to get buy-in. And I have like 2 or 3 kind of crazy experiments. I'm pointing you to the different tabs of like connecting data into Google Sheets and doing stuff that I'm doing right now so that I can, make the case internally that, I'd like to have the developer actually, formalize this. And that's the fun for me. And I know that, that goes beyond the traditional marketing role. And that's why I don't really consider what I do necessarily, traditional marketing, but I find it's a lot of fun. It's like, people that really enjoy fixing up old cars, and there's a lot of that kind of satisfaction of building, this idea of building things and connecting things and putting the pipes together is very satisfying, and it's a lot of fun. And I don't think I'm the only one that gets that kind of feeling of satisfaction from it.
Nope, I'm certainly here as well.
Yeah,
definitely. I say let's take one more question, and then we'll switch to questions from the audience. I mean, we've touched on forecasting, on AI, on data, and how to pick the tools to use. Maybe like one different view is like the customer experience in general, right? Like when people look at the customer experience, you already said it in the beginning, right? Like RevOps is not actually talking with the customer, but is facilitating like throughout the journey, actually. So what are like some different roles that RevOps actually plays in building out the ideal customer experience?
I can give one from my previous, one of the companies I worked for. I implemented a self-checkout system where instead, it was a pure SaaS licensing. So you had licenses, you paid a yearly fee up front, but you also had an API, which is super bespoke and custom built depending on the customer's needs and all that. But we were still selling a lot of the licenses to those same sized customers that we were trying to pitch the API, when in fact you could actually be doing a lot of that just by a self-service checkout, right? You don't have to spend a massive amount of time, selling and, going after them and sending emails and all that, when you can just give them a solution. So I basically built that directly from our billing and invoicing system, streamlined that through documentation, because that is also kind of important for us to instruct internally our sales reps, our marketing team as well, on how the customer should interact and when with the self-service checkout. And so everything was built. The infrastructure was also built, because it's not just a finance system, right? You're not just charging them. You also need to automatically provision a license in the back end, create an instance, so on and so forth. So you have to connect that with the product and the back end. But once that was all done, we were seeing massive decreases in sales cycles, because a lot of the customers were smaller customers, not small, but smaller customers who were just asking for 1 or 2 extra licenses when they could just go in and buy themselves with a credit card directly, right? That also reduces a lot of the dunning, which we would get in finance. So there's a lot of things that cascade. Customers were actually happier from an NPS and CSAT perspective, because it was just easier to interact, right? And people usually think B2B SaaS has to be complex because it's B2B, but it's not true. You still can have great experiences across the board. So that is something that was entirely built by RevOps, and at the time, just me. And that was it, right? We massively reduced the sales cycles, and the customer satisfaction in general increased significantly. So,
yeah. I think there is a important differentiation that one can make between the customer experience and the user experience. There might be this idea that you see experience and you assume it's the product and how the product functions, but that's not the customer experience is how their interaction with the company as a whole, whether it's the product or sales or success or billing or whatever it is. And so that process is ongoing, and it happens in a lot of places. And so I think, along with, similar to user experience, customer experience, and RevOps' role there has to do with reducing friction. A friction will kill people's overall kind of level of satisfaction of, NPS and all those things. And I think Nick pointed it out that the lowest hanging fruit from a RevOps perspective to reduce that friction is with, the way, self-serve models, and making it easier for somebody to expand their usage, or their what they're getting out of the product, whether that's, from a product-led motion, being able to self-checkout, or to an automated process of, renewals and things like that. RevOps plays a big role there. And I think that, we were in this world where there was a long time where it was like every company was told, you have to go, quote unquote, product led. You have to do this. You have to support everything self-serve. And I think a lot of companies upended their entire organizations, turned everything upside down to do this. And then the door swung the other way. And now PLG is really not in vogue anymore. And I think a lot of companies were caught off guard and are still struggling to get things settled. And what I mean is, you have to be able to do both. You have to be able to support that product-led motion. Maybe not necessarily have your entire growth go-to-market model be free usage until you hit a certain point and then upsell. But the notion of self-serve expansion, falling under that category of product-led growth, I think is true, and will continue to be true. And RevOps has to be able to support that.
Could not agree more. All right, looking at the clock, let's make sure that we can get some of the questions from the audience in. Here we have one. So there are still many companies unaware of RevOps and its importance. How would you convince the C-level to invest in it?
I mean, they may not know the RevOps and its importance, but they know revenue and its importance. And therefore, I think that, it's, especially now, we've kind of touched on it a few different places. We're in a macroeconomic situation in which is definitely more challenged than it was a year or two ago, where there was this idea of growth at all costs. It doesn't matter how much we spend on a customer or a user. It doesn't even have to be a customer, as long as there's growth. That no longer is the case. It's about squeezing as much juice out of the fruit as you can. And you're not going to be able to find those new opportunities for increased revenue without this type of role. And so, if you're a C-suite that is unaware of the need for that, then I question, if you're, I question the how long you're going to be in your C-suite role.
Yeah, I think also adding on to that, we do have a massive shift, right? Before 2021, the leading indicator for growth was headcount, right? How many people were hiring and they're increasing the team. But nobody actually really focused on how many customers are we actually managed to retain, right? We're not looking really into that. We were looking at new business. That meant one of the indicators for growth, and headcount. Now, we pivoted significantly since the pandemic, and also even since last year, where VCs were starting to really look into, well, you know what? Actually, growth at all costs is not really sustainable, because it isn't. It's in the name, right? In the term.
Yeah.
What happened was that all the companies that received this massive injection of cash and went straight through the door and focused already on go-to-market, right? And started going to market without really validating the product or really focusing on the product, on what were you actually trying to achieve? What are we trying to solve? They had to then do a 180 and figure out that, well, actually, we need to really iron this out first, right? We're not really ready to sell or really ready to scale the product we have. So then we have the economic downturn in SaaS, right? The layoffs and all that. So essentially, bringing efficiency to that and making us not need to get to that point ever again is, in my opinion, and as Mark said, should be enough at least for people to see the value and the importance, right? And I have seen a lot of C-levels who don't. When you say, "Do you have RevOps?" or "Are you thinking about it?" and they say, "What?" Like, wow, okay, well, maybe it's not even a good place to start, right? So, yeah, absolutely. I think time saved and efficiencies across the board should be enough.
Yeah, and I would just point out that the golden metric, I think before, especially during the pandemic, where there was this rush of VC dollars that propped up a lot of SaaS companies that probably weren't sustainable. We were talking about ARR, net new customer acquisition, as being the thing everyone looked at, and that's not the case today. And I think more and more the golden metric is the net revenue retention metric.
Exactly.
Even that name is a bit of a misnomer. Net revenue retention is not necessarily about retention, it's about expansion. You want a net revenue retention number above 100%. And when you have a net revenue retention of 120, 130%, that is the greatest indicator, at least in the eyes of the market, whether that's VC or public or whatever, of a company that's doing well in this environment. And, it doesn't seem like all C-suites are on board with this yet. There are some that think that we're in a transitionary period. We're going to revert back to the norm. That wasn't the norm. This is the norm. That was the outlier. And I think the sooner people realize that, the better.
All right. I will give one more minute to see if, in the meantime, we'll see if there's more questions coming in. Is there anything else you think we haven't covered today about RevOps that you think, like, hey, the people that are listening, they should know this?
I think that, yeah, no, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say probably, but it's probably going to also extend over 7 minutes. So,
yeah.
But Mark, if you have anything, just go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we are in the world changes faster and faster, I think, each year. There's that notion of, what is it, that the speed of chips kind of doubles every year or whatever. I think the rate of change increases. And companies that have rigid systems, processes in place that cannot, be flexible to meet changing needs are going to get slaughtered. That happened when people upturned their entire companies to be PLG, and then things swung back. There is no steady state. And so I think as a RevOps person, everything you build, every concept, everything has to be done with the notion that you have to be flexible. You have to be able to evolve to a very changing market. And I don't know if kind of the standard tech out there has been built to deal with those changes. Like, you think about Salesforce was built, however, in the Stone Ages. It was not meant for something that is constantly in flux. Like, to do a change in Salesforce has so many dependencies. You have to do like a re-implementation. By the time you do the re-implementation, your pricing model has changed again, and you have to re-implement again. And that's just, so what that means is that everything has to be done with the notion of flexibility and agility to a changing market, even if you're an enterprise company, or else you're not going to be able to survive. And so I think that if it's one thing that people can take home with them, it's that.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. I was at a talk last week with Ellie Miller, and she was also saying something very in line with this. It's like, there's this note of like the only constant is change, but actually more so, she said, this is the slowest rate of change you'll see in the coming period. So get on board,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the art of prioritizing in the change environment is also massively important, and probably your best friend at the same time, or your worst enemy, really, depending on how you go about it. But learning to prioritize and figure out of the 10 things that I have to do, 2 or 3 are going to cause 80% of the impact, right? Pick those, go with those, because if you keep shifting your priorities all the time, you're not going to get anything done. And getting things done and showing value as quickly as you can is extremely important moving forward for obviously all roles, but especially the non-revenue generating, like the ones that directly generate revenue, like revenue operations.
So that's a good jump into the question that just got from one of the audience, which is exactly about that, right? So do you think RevOps have to and can even prove their ROI? And then saying, I mean, for example, what's the ROI of implementing OKRs?
I mean, yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
No, I mean, I don't know the answer, but you know, I don't think you can. I don't think every role can have like a quota like sales, where there is a a very binary kind of obvious measure. You know, there are things that are intangible, specific to implementing OKRs. Time savings. If the people who have the OKRs are hitting their quotas, I mean, there's ways of doing it, but I don't know if there's like a dashboard you could have that shows a good or bad RevOps person.
No, I mean, that's the advantage and disadvantage of working within project-based, right? When you're in sales, you have the quota, and then you have how much you closed, and you can do one divided by the other. You get your percentage, and that's it. That's kind of easy. But if you're talking about projects, then you do a project, and then my suggestion of it every time I start completing or working on an OKR or project in general is, how am I going to measure the success of this, right? Because every project has a success threshold, what you would consider to have been good or excellent. And usually tools that you implement and processes that you build are designed with an end in mind, right? Or a reason in mind. Be that a new tool to streamline, I don't know, account planning or lead distribution, or you can take the state it was before and take the state it is now. Usually you're going to be talking about time saved. So it took X amount of time, or it took massive back and forth between the SDRs to figure out which account they should be working, if it's a parent or a child and all that. If you have everything streamlined in a very easy to understand and digestible way, you're saving them time of going through the admin and actually being able to focus on their job, for example. So map out your OKRs and figure out what the success metric is, what it is currently, and then figure out how to do that at the end. And I think you can easily prove ROI.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. On that note, we will be closing. We've hit the hour. So I want to thank you both for sharing your views here. This was great. Yeah, thanks again, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.
It was a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody on this side of the Atlantic.
Happy